It sucks to live in the Caucasus. Hello, welcome to Dangerous Policy, a channel aimed at intelligent people wanting to discuss important issues facing life and society. My name is Crispin, and today I'm going to talk about the horrendous conflict that is happening at the moment between Azerbaijan and Armenia. I want to talk about the conflict itself, the belligerents involved, and what it means for the broader alliances and strategic relationships, and then some perhaps where to from here. There is a breakaway region of Azerbaijan called the Nagorno-Karabakh region, and it is primarily Armenian ethnic population, and that has been under the control of the Armenians for many years. Recently, the Azerbaijani military launched a major offensive against that capital region, where there's over 150,000 sort of ethnic Armenians living in this highly mountainous area. The Azerbaijanis have tremendous military superiority over Armenia. Armenia is this poor sort of landlocked country in the Caucasus, and Azerbaijan has highly advanced drone technologies. They are massively supported also by Ankara, their Turkish allies, and which is a little bit strange on one level because the Azerbaijanis themselves are predominantly Shia Muslims, and of course, Turkey is a Sunni stronghold. Nevertheless, Turkey has a certain history and visceral hatred of the Armenians, and this is something that I personally find quite offensive and detestable. So, as many of you would know, in the early 20th century, the crimes perpetrated by the Ottoman Turk against the Armenians were so egregious, such a massive crime against humanity that we had to invent a new word to describe it. Genocide. The Armenian genocide really set the theme for that in the early part of the 20th century. And there's something a little bit gross about the Turks supporting a conflict against Armenia, which they are doing. It'd be a bit like Germany supporting a conflict, a military attack against Israel. There is not a human legitimacy there. And yet it is true to form for President Erdogan. He has recently, as you'd all know, seized the Hagia Sophia, the most sort of sacred church in all of Orthodox Christendom, and reconsecrated it as a mosque. A huge crime against that particular Orthodox faith, not something I think the Russians will easily forgive, and nor should the West forget. Erdogan is not a trustworthy NATO ally, and we should not treat him as such. And so he is, backing the Azerbaijanis completely. And yet Armenia is part of a military alliance called the Central Treaty Security Organization, which is headed by Moscow and has a lot of the Central Asian states and Belarus. And yet Vladimir Putin, a number of days ago, came out publicly and said that, Armenia itself has not been attacked. It's just this breakaway region, which is internationally recognized as Azerbaijani territory. A not so subtle way of saying that Putin is committed to Armenian security, but it won't get involved so long as the conflict is restrained to what is internationally recognized as Azerbaijan. So that is a clear indication that the Azerbaijanis have sort of a green light. Now, before we condemn Putin on this, there is criticism to be had, of course, there is a significant Azerbaijani diaspora living in Russia, as there is with the Armenians, and therefore we should be mindful that Russia has an interest in trying to just stem hostilities rather than picking one side or the other. Russia is also very lukewarm to the current government in Armenia. The government in Yerevan is a little bit too pro-Western for the taste of the Russian government. It has been trying to improve relations with the EU, with NATO, opening up to the West, distancing itself from Moscow in a whole range of areas, implementing democratic reforms at home, all the things that the Russian government dislikes. So I don't think Vladimir Putin wants to put too much political investment into protecting a government in Armenia that they don't necessarily get along with. It is also the case that Russia has a ton of other problems right now. It has Germany rightly accusing the Russian government of poisoning Alexei Navalny with Novichok. It's got new sanctions coming in because of that. Its economy is suffering because of oil prices and the pandemic. It has Belarus to contend with. It has, increasing discontent at home against Vladimir Putin's continued autocratic rule, and therefore Russia just doesn't have the attention at the moment to be able to devote to this conflict, and wouldn't dare have another open-ended military deployment in the Caucasus region that could just suck further, arms and resources away from an already weakened country. You can see the Azerbaijanis really picked their moment. 2020, the pandemic, the world distracted. And unfortunately, the American situation is no better. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo came out recently and said that, he calls on all sides to cease hostilities, that we're monitoring it with interest. But that's all. It was quite obvious that the Americans just don't have either the interest or really the capacity to directly inject itself into this conflict. And people can really overestimate the ability of countries in the Caucasus region to build ties with NATO and the EU and the Americans. It's a long way away. It's deep between deep between Russia, China, Iran, Afghanistan. It's way past the far end of the Black Sea, up the Caspian Sea. Well and truly in the sphere of influence of other great powers. And the United States just doesn't have the power projection to really inject itself into that region too much, and to do so safely and with constant lines of supply. It's a very dangerous thing for America to get involved in that area, and very hard to see what's in it for them. And those countries that want to sort of improve relations with the EU and join NATO, you need to have physical proximity to NATO to do that. And that's why Macedonia, now North Macedonia, was able to do that. They had a government that came in that was very pro-EU, very pro-NATO. It was a very divided country in that respect. I will do a video on this. And yet they had the physical proximity. They could move to join up all of these organizations, and they could rename their country at home, tear down some statues that upset the Greeks in order to accede to the EU. And so, North Macedonia, for that reason, is pulling out of Russia's orbit and going towards the west, whereas very, very difficult for countries and areas in the Caucasus to do that. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. Vladimir Putin did host, in the last couple of days, a critically important summit in Moscow. The foreign ministers of both Armenia and Azerbaijan. And after a marathon negotiation over 10 hours, where I imagine a lot was discussed, they brokered a ceasefire. And I actually think that the length of time for this discussion is more significant than one would expect, because I think initially on the agenda was just to have like a ceasefire to allow the exchange of dead and the exchange of prisoners. Whereas if the negotiations took this long, I think it is considered part of a broader roadmap towards peace. And as tragically and as sympathetically as I think about the Armenians in this situation and those particularly affected in that region, it is clear that the best that they can hope for is a long-term ceasefire that is going to significantly advantage the Azerbaijanis. There is too much at stake for the regional powers to allow this to turn into a broader conflagration, and therefore the Azerbaijanis will, ultimately settle for significant gains, and the Armenians will suffer the unfortunate disadvantage of that. The reason being that that region is critical for the Chinese New Silk Road initiatives, the Belt and Road initiatives, and the stabilization of Central Asia is critical to China's long-term grand strategy. So China will maintain an interest in this. And just while we're on this topic, I'll discuss something I've noticed about China's changing diplomacy from sort of the 1970s to the 2000s, and then from the 2000s to now, was that previously they had one single-minded foreign policy apparatchik view And that was to resist any undermining of sovereignty no matter what. So they would be against the breakup of Kosovo or any breakaway regions of other movements, any votes for independence from territories. They were totally against that. And that was because they didn't want to give any grounds at all for people that saying that Taiwan should move to independence, that Hong Kong should be independent. And that was the view that they just kind of regurgitated. And the one thing you could rely on the Chinese for was that they would vote in whatever preserved the territorial integrity of another country, no matter what. And that has changed. And notably with Ukraine, the Chinese were very silent on the breakaway of Crimea and joining Russia, the breakaway of eastern Ukraine, Donetsk and regions like that. And why? Because it wasn't in the Chinese national interest to upset Russia or embarrass them publicly on the world stage. Accordingly, China, and with the Georgia conflict as well, we saw that in sort of 2008, 2009. Again, China was relatively silent. And so they have introduced a new geopolitical pragmatism to this. Ergo, they are likely to just back whatever side, whatever pathway leads to peace and stability in the Caucasus without injecting their own ideology, because they're acting much more like a generic great power rather than an ideological movement. And they would be providing support to Vladimir Putin in those peacemaking efforts. So we've got a new ceasefire. I expect it will probably hold. There'll be some additional pushing of the boundaries on both sides, and I think Azerbaijan will get whatever it can while the going is good. But nevertheless, there is a strong interest on all sides to reduce and ease tensions, but no one is going to get justice. This is going to be a terrible human event that is going to remain relatively unstable for many years to come. Very hard to see a permanent settlement short of the entire expulsions of Armenia from Azerbaijani territory, and that the ethnic Armenians and the Armenian government accepting that, then we're going to have instability in this area for a long time. I hope you found sort of value in this discussion. It's not a pleasant subject, and there is sort of a black box in Central Asia. You really need to go to quite eclectic experts to get good information on this area, but it is critically important because it is fundamental to China's long-term grand strategy. So do pay attention to it, because it will affect us in the collective West, even if it's not so visible right now. And certainly when it comes to Turkey, it's just another indication of Erdogan's behavior. If you found value in this, please do like and subscribe. We talk about these issues all of the time. There's some more topics on Central Asia that we'll be discussing soon, so stay tuned for that. And please leave a comment down below. I definitely would like to hear your thoughts on it. We will discuss them in the week in review, and I will see you next time. Thank you.